Good evening. Welcome, everybody, to the Bexley Public Library. To those of you in person and online, I'm Ben Heckman, the library director, and it's great to see so many of you on this very rainy, maybe it stopped raining day, so we're glad that you came out. Welcome to the second installment of our Next Chapter series, where we are taking a look at what maybe is going to be happening to our community in the future so that we can educate what is happening and what things will look like and how it's going to impact all of our lives. The man is back in the room for a second time. Who was here last time? Raise your hand. Look at those repeat customers. So good. So I want to welcome you all. I want to give just a few seconds for a couple programs we have coming up. Throwback Thursday, next Thursday, the 29th at 7 p.m. at the Drexel. We're going to be exploring the history of the Drexel Theater, so you can come and share your memories. We've got great photos from the past that we're going to be exploring. The Bexley Minority Parent Alliance Art Auction and Open House is going to be Sunday, March 10th from 2 to 4 here at the library, so come and take a look at some great art. And then he is coming back a third time with Next Chapter, The Future of Transportation in Central Ohio. Michael Wilkos will be here Thursday, March 28th at 6:30. He's going to moderate a panel. We still want you to talk as much as you want. With representatives from Morpsey, Transit Columbus, and Linkus. There's a lot of things happening on that front. I think this November we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure, so be sure to put that into your calendar. And just a quick note on tonight's program. This is a hybrid program, so for those joining us in the room, if you have a question at the end, we'll bring the microphone over to you so that people can hear online, and we are live streaming this and recording it so that anyone in our community or beyond can have access to it. And I will help with the microphone this time, Zach. That's Zach Parrish. Give it up for Zach Parrish over there on the ones and twos. He gets it all set up. He hands me the sheets of paper, and then you have to hear me drone. And for those joining online, feel free to type in any questions that you have during the presentation. And with that, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Megan Meyer, the Director of Administration and Development for the City of Bexley.
Thank you. Thank you, Library Ben. So I have had the distinct pleasure of serving in the Bexley community for a total of 2 months. And I can tell you it has been a truly special experience in so many ways. I've been brought on board to help with both economic development and community engagement. So if I have not gotten the chance to meet you yet, I really do look forward to doing that in the near future. With that, my task tonight is to, of course, introduce our speaker. In many rooms, he needs no introduction, but if that were the case tonight, I would be out of a job. So here we go. Michael Wilkos is a Senior Vice President of Community Impact at United Way of Central Ohio. His team develops effective strategies to improve our communities. Prior to joining United Way, Michael was Director of Community Research at the Columbus Foundation. While there, he spent a decade working in Wyland Park in an effort to stabilize and revitalize a mixed-income community near the Ohio State University, where he resides. Before working at the Columbus Foundation, Michael served as Senior Impact Director and Director of Neighborhood Development at United Way of Central Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Michael Wilkos.
I'm not using that. Thank you, Megan, and good evening. It's nice to see, 8 or 9 of you that were here last month, maybe another since Steve snuck in the back room. So there's going to be a lot of things I want to talk with you about today, but there's going to be a little bit of a repeat of some of the information I went over last month because I think it's important context. So what do I hope to do with you today? We're going to talk about the growth of our city and region, what's happening with the changing demographics, how that is playing out geographically around our city. We'll talk about the impacts on the housing market, but then we're going to go into the history behind how some of the trends that are happening today are really just extensions of what has been going on for many, many, many decades. And before we close the night, I'm going to give you 4 things that have me very excited about the future of Central Ohio and things that I believe can be restorative justice to repair some of the issues of the past that have been rooted in structural racism and historical systems of oppression. So with that, does that sound good? Okay, that's a lot in an hour, right? You're going to get my entire undergrad and graduate education at Ohio State in the next 60 minutes. That's pretty good value for the money. All right. So Those two folks are my paternal grandparents, neither of which were born in the United States, one from Poland, one from Czechoslovakia. They both came to the United States when they were preteens, fell in love, and as the family history goes, lived happily ever after. This is where I'm from. Anybody else in the room from Northeast Ohio, Youngstown area? Whereabouts? Niles. And I forget, where are you from? Okay. But I grew up in Youngstown, and here is where my grandfather worked his entire life. He was an electrician for U.S. Steel, and he was able to achieve middle-class status because he was able to move to a country and a city that was offering middle-class jobs and middle-class opportunity for someone like him. But there was this fateful day in the fall of 1977 when a couple thousand people showed up for work, only to learn that the steel mill was closing, and that day was their last day of employment. That episode in Youngstown actually changed laws that said if companies are going to permanently go out of business, you have to give people a 90-day notice. But what happened with the closure of Youngstown Sheet and Tube, it was a domino effect. LTV, Jones and Laughlin, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, between 1977 and 1981, it was one right after another. To put that in perspective, for the size of Youngstown relative to the size of Columbus, it would be as if the Ohio State University were to close its doors, JP Morgan Chase, and Nationwide, and L Brands were to all leave Columbus in 48 months. What do you think our city would look like, right? So here is what Youngstown was known for. It was miles and miles of steel production. And there was an industrial that went to Youngstown to say, this isn't coming back. And the way of life that you once knew will not return to this community, and you have to let go of these mills. And if you don't let go of these mills, people won't be able to intellectually and emotionally move on. So those mills have come down. The trains still run through the valley, so when you go to Youngstown now, you'll see these grid patterns of commercial single-loaded streets where the other side of the street would be where the mills would be, and then you see kind of urban dense housing and single-family homes kind of climbing those hillsides. And then there's this mile-long stretch that runs along the river of just flat fields, which is where everybody's economic opportunity once laid. So this picture was taken of the Jenny Blast furnace just a handful of years after I left Youngstown to come to Columbus to go to the Ohio State University. And this picture went viral around the world at the time because it was an indication that the United States as an industrial power was ending. And it was around the same time that Richard Florida wrote the book, The Rise of the Creative Class. And he was the first person to identify that more people in this country now use our brains than our hands to make a living. What was Detroit and Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Akron and Dayton, right? That's where you made things. That wasn't what we did. We were a different kind of city. So I'm going to start this conversation with, I love this quote. I use it all the time. Longtime Chicago Tribune columnist when he says, our dilemma is that, right, we hate change and love it at the same time. What we really want is things to remain the same but get better. There is optimism in this city right now, and there is no denying Columbus's influence and size is destined for greatness. But it doesn't mean everybody's excited about the change. And for all the years I've been giving presentations about the city, and what do I do at United Way? We work with the 400,000 people in Franklin County that live at 200% of federal poverty. And disproportionately, that looks very different than the rest of Columbus, racially, demographically. And they are not as excited about the growth of the city. Why? They don't see that economic opportunity coming to them, but they see the price increases of housing displacing their communities. So it's not really optimism in some neighborhoods, it's a little bit of fear. And here's what's driving that, right? We've added 263,000 people in the last 12 years, and while this is true for us, the rest of the state lost 20,000. If you look at the growth of our region, it has been inching up as a measurement of how many people do we add every single year. But for those of us that live and work in Franklin County, it sure does feel like the growth of the region is picking up, and here is why. If you look at that second from the right column at 43%, between 2000 and 2010, 43% of our region's growth occurred in Franklin County. After 2010, the growth of the region dramatically shifted and started to come inward. Why did it come inward? How are we growing? New Americans with large families need large housing units, young single people who need rental housing, seniors who need a different kind of living situation and convenience to services. That is not Union, Delaware, Licking, and Fairfield counties. That kind of housing's in Franklin. And so as the demographics of who we are started to shift, people came inward to find the housing product that aligns with who they now are and what's happening in their individual lives. Here's the city of Columbus as of the last census, 906,000 people. The city of Columbus just experienced its fastest rate of growth in 70 years, and measured numerically, it was the largest decennial increase ever in Columbus history. Adding 119,000 people, and Columbus was one of only 10 places in the United States that gained more than 100,000 new residents. If you look at this chart from the very bottom, what you'll notice in the United States, growth went from 9.7 to 7.4%. That was the slowest growth in the United States since the Great Depression, and growth in America slowed by 28 percentage points. Go to the top of the slide. As growth in America was slowing, growth in the city of Columbus accelerated by 50%. The growth of Franklin County also went up, and all of the increase in population growth for the state was us. Said another way, 73% of Ohio's population growth is Franklin County only. Put this in further perspective, there'll be 44 more people living in this county when you go to bed tonight than when you got up in the morning. And on an annual basis, that's 16,000 people. Challenge has been, we've only been adding housing for 10,500. Every year for a decade, 5,500 more people were living in this community, and nobody put anywhere for them to put their head on a pillow at night. How are we growing? 50% of our growth is babies over deaths. We have a high birth rate for the Midwest. We'll grow naturally because we have young families. 26% of our growth are people coming here from another part of the globe. And the smallest part, 24%, are American-born people leaving where they're from and coming to Central Ohio. Almost all of that is Cleveland, Dayton, Akron, Detroit, Youngstown. And when you leave Central Ohio, it's Phoenix, Houston, Dallas, Charlotte, Atlanta. Columbus is in many ways on a trajectory for people up and out of the state. You tend to come to Columbus from a nearby city that's not doing as well. And when you leave Columbus, you leave the state, you leave the Midwest. That's the pattern. So here's the whole county. Up 160,000 people, 14%. There are two places with multiple census tracts still losing population despite this growth. One of those is right there at Cosi. Every neighborhood along Sullivan Avenue and West Broad Street is losing households, housing units, and people, as the West Side can't seem to stabilize even in this strong economy, and mainly the opioid epidemic just really has a hold on the West Side. So what's the other area losing people? That whole zone south of Children's Hospital. That's Parsons Avenue. The hospital sits right there. Every neighborhood along Parsons, Miller, Kelton, and Whittier, that's also losing people, not because the South Side is on the decline, but the South Side is on the rapid rise, and renter families are often getting replaced by homeowners, and that homeowner tends to be a single buyer replacing a renter family of 4 or 5. Okay. All of the growth of the city of Columbus is through the lens of diversity. Fastest growth in 70 years, largest numeric increase in Columbus history, and it was the first time the white population within the city limits fell in real numbers. That is also now true for Franklin County. That's how quickly we are becoming a very different community. Here's the chart. Don't need to read it. It's not that significant that the white population fell by 3,000 individuals, right? I wouldn't call that a sea change. I'm going to oversimplify the trends. Higher income white households are moving to Union, Delaware, Licking, and Fairfield counties. The replacement populations tend to look very different. But if you look at the white population growth relative to every other demographic group on the slide, you'll see there's significant changes. Some of this is also because people don't like these categories anymore, but we're stuck with them. So some people who used to identify as white alone or black alone feel that that's no longer a good description of their family journey, so they're moving to other or 2 or more races. Even with that acknowledgement of a self-identification, this is a big shift for us. And if we don't address the role that systemic racism continues to play out, this is who's experiencing poverty or lack of access to economic mobility through the lens of race. So if all of our population growth for the city and the county is non-white, and because of systemic systems of racism and oppression, we are in fact a more vulnerable community now than 10 years ago as a measurement of the economic stability of who's in the county, right? More on that to come. The other thing is the census said, you know, the spring of 2020 was not a good time to do a census. There's a lot going on. And the US government said, hey, we think we got the top line right for America, but we overcounted white and Asian America, and we undercounted black and Hispanic. They learned that through statistical methodology. They do not go back and correct the count, but they acknowledge it's off a little bit. It's usually off, right? If you apply that to here, the white population of Franklin County probably didn't drop by 3,000. It might have dropped by more like 16,000. I share this to say we are racially changing quickly. We're probably changing it at even a faster rate than what the numbers suggest. Everywhere is getting more diverse, and this map in green shows where diversity is on the rise. The increase in diversity was in inner ring suburbs, it was in urban neighborhoods, it was suburban Columbus, and it was the Beltway suburbs. We didn't all get diverse in the same way, but everywhere is getting more diverse. The other thing about Central Ohio is we are a magnet for new Americans. We are, in fact, just, we're less than 4% of the state of Ohio was born outside the United States. It's more than 8% for us. And when you look at the share of Central Ohio of the state's population relative to the share of new Americans, we are, in fact, a new American destination. And disproportionately, new Americans living in our region are choosing Franklin County as their place of residence. And where is the epicenter of that movement? Morse Road in Northland. If you look at the profile of the diversity of who's coming to Central Ohio, about 41% of that is coming from 5 countries. We are a second-tier emerging market like a Charlotte or Indianapolis. Those kinds of destinations tend to see their new American population come from a single continent. So in Charlotte and Indy, most of that new American population speaks the same language, Spanish. But Columbus looks more like a Miami, an LA, or a New York in that our distribution of where people are coming from is very much evenly distributed from across the globe. Some of that's the impact of Ohio State. Some of that's the impact of the companies that are here. Some of that's by the jobs that are in Central Ohio. But what it's done is it's made our movement towards cultural competency a little more difficult for social service agencies, or let's say riding the bus, right? Think about all the different languages and customs now in Columbus that were not here 10 or 15 years ago. And the other thing I thought was really interesting about Central Ohio's new American population, if you look on the left, in Central Ohio, if you were born outside the United States, 26% are on Medicaid or Medicare, but it's 31% for American-born people in Central Ohio. So just kind of dispelling a little bit of myth here. The other thing is when you move to the right side of the slide, 24% of all new Americans in Central Ohio have been in the United States less than 5 years. For our country, about 24% of America has been here 10 years or less, meaning the new American population in Central Ohio is much newer to this country. They're not just new to us, they're new to our country, right? But new Americans in Central Ohio, by the way, have the highest labor force participation rate of any demographic. They are working, they're not on Medicaid or Medicare, and they are starting businesses. Oops. Here's the geography of that new American population, and there's something fascinating about this map. There's Ohio State, right? But where's the new American population of 2020? It's not in urban core neighborhoods. It's out here at 270 and 70 on the far west side, right? Here's Henderson Road, right? And then Bethel. This is all northwest Columbus heading into Dublin. Look at Northland, right? And then another emerging new American community out here in Reynoldsburg. And maybe you know that Reynoldsburg has the first and only publicly elected person in the United States who's Nepali Bhutanese and is on Reynoldsburg City Council, which is an indication of how much Reynoldsburg has changed. And by the way, Reynoldsburg schools are the only school district in Franklin County that is an even distribution, 1/3 white, 1/3 black, 1/3 Hispanic. You only have to look at what's happening in the change of diversity in Franklin County school districts to see where our future lies, because that's the workforce of tomorrow, right? One of the things you want to see here is that in yellow, except for Whitehall, every community from Reynoldsburg down to Bexley, the city of Columbus is physically in those school districts. Meaning the city of Columbus's land use and zoning is actually providing economic opportunity to diversify those places. And where Bexley, Arlington, and Grandview, the school districts and the political jurisdictions are coterminous, that's where you're seeing the least amount of change, and we're going to kind of get into that in a little deeper. Despite this increase in diversity, we know we're not living racially integrated in Central Ohio. In red shows all of the places where people live in racial isolation. Let's pick apart this map. This is all south of Grove City. Farms, very few people live there. We wouldn't expect that to be very diverse. That's also true for right here. That's the Battelle-Darby watershed accord where very few people live there. So what are the most racially isolated places in 2020? They are Bexley, German Village, Grandview through Arlington, Clintonville, and Worthington. It's fascinating to me that racial homogeneity is in the city of Columbus, in the Columbus School District, and it is a suburban phenomenon. But what kind of suburbs? Inner ring suburbs, not the Beltway suburbs. Meaning, of the 6 most racially isolated places today, 5 of the 6 had some type of restriction not allowing people of color to live there when they were built. German Village being the only one that did not have those prohibitions. And 80, 90 years later, the racial identity of those places is not budging. Why is it not budging? I believe it's because of the popularity and the multi-generational return of housing customers in places like Grandview, Arlington, and Bexley. If Bexley looked a certain way in 1920, and a lot of people love Bexley, they grew up there, they might leave for a few years and come back, who's that new replacement population going to always look like? It's going to look like the origin story for that community. Look at the far left, top left in Dublin, right? Dublin and New Albany are much, much more diverse than Bexley, Arlington, and Clintonville. Dublin and New Albany are homogeneous through the lens of economics because their land use and zoning code has said New Albany and Dublin are going to be wealthy. But Dublin and New Albany had been built entirely after fair housing laws were deployed in 1968, and then therefore they look very, very different culturally, linguistically, and it's so much so that Dublin City Schools is only 59% white. The second largest group at 22%, Asian. So now let's talk about, I want to give you an example of a neighborhood. The Near East Side had a lot of changes, right? So between downtown and Bexley, 670 down to Livingston Avenue. But unlike what we've tracked in places like Linden, which added 3,000 people, Northland, which added 14,000, Northland added the equivalent of the entire population of Bexley in the last 10 years, and they only added 480 housing units. The Near East Side had modest population growth because the Near East Side was still losing population for the first part of the decade. But what was interesting about the 550-person increase, the Near East Side lost 1,100 children, and it lost 1,600 seniors, but it gained 3,100 people between the ages of 18 and 64. What does that mean? What's that? Gentrification. Someone say gentrification? Yeah. When a neighborhood starts to kick out children and seniors, right? What's happening, in my opinion, is now all of a sudden this organic place that hopefully appreciates people of different ages, incomes, and cultures is now a housing economic system. And the households there are responding to those housing costs. And children and seniors aren't in the labor market. They have no ability to contribute to those rising housing costs. And so in a neighborhood like that, they're losing children, they're losing seniors. In 1970, the Short North had just as many kids as any Columbus neighborhood. By 1990, those kids were almost entirely gone. That is now happening to the Near East Side. The other thing that's happening in the Near East Side is it is experiencing a racial flip-flop. The white population surged from 19 to 37%. The black population is plummeting between downtown and Bexley. They're losing seniors, they're losing kids. What's happening on the Near East Side is opposite of the trends happening across the city and the county. If you look at the Near East Side through a longer lens, something very fascinating reveals itself. The red line is from Broad up to 670, downtown to Bexley, Mount Vernon Avenue, Long Street. That's been the heart of the black community for a really long time. So the percentage of the black or African American population kind of stayed the same. After 2000, you started to see a change. It really started to change after 2010. So now let's go from Broad to Livingston, Main, and Bryden, running right down the middle, including Franklin Park. That neighborhood was 4% black in 1940. 20 years later, it's 40. 20 years later, it's 80. It only stays there for 20 years. And now that portion of the Near East Side has the same racial identity as it had in 1960. What was going on here? Yep. More specifically, redlining, restrictive covenants, busing, urban renewal, and highway building, right? And so white folks are moving out, black folks are living in segregated neighborhoods, right? It stays with that identity for a little while. Now the growth of the region's accelerating. The growth is moving inward. We're not building enough housing. And all of these historical patterns have been thrown into a tailspin. The question becomes, what do you do when you live in a neighborhood that's had a racial identity for nearly a century, and now the racial identity is shifting? What do you do, and how do you host a conversation if you live in a neighborhood that has a racial identity roller coaster? And those two things are happening opposite of what's happening across the city, which is a pretty predictable trend line, right? Who's hosting that conversation for people to make sense of all of this? And the answer, unfortunately, is usually nobody. What's happening on the Near East Side is happening all across urban Columbus. It's happening in Whitehall and Reynoldsburg. There's 1,200 less vacant structures on the Near East Side than 10 years ago, and the number of vacant houses on the Near East Side plummeted by a third. And here are examples of how that's manifesting itself. Look at the picture in the top right, that little bungalow home. That house went from $154,000 to $270,000 in 90 days. This home in the center went from $123,000 to $340,000 in 120 days. These are examples of properties recently sold near Children's Hospital that represent the kind of housing stock that might have been a renter family with 3 school-age kids going to CCS schools on the south side. Now it's a single person who owns it, and the population of the neighborhood is dropping. The question is, where are the low-income families on the south side going? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Anecdotally, I can tell you what the nonprofit sector tells United Way, low-income families south of Children's Hospital are going to Hamilton and Kimberly Parkway. They're going out towards Bryce Road. They're going to Marion Franklin, right? They're heading south-southeast because south-southeast has yet to experience the housing cost jumps of other parts of the city. So now let's remove ourselves from a neighborhood and go to the whole map. And these are going to be really important as we get into history. In green is where the black population's on the rise. In red is where the black population fell in the last 10 years. And now I'm going to oversimplify my 7 years at Ohio State. After 2010, the black middle class really started to leave the Columbus City School District. And where are black families going? Westerville, Gahanna, New Albany, Reynoldsburg, Pickerington. But after 2010, the black population in the core of the city started to leave. Largest drop in the black population was Franklinton, where the black population fell 61% in a decade. Here you see 2 pictures of Franklinton in the exact same spot 10 years apart. The decade began with CMHA, Public Housing Authorities, Riverside Bradley. 10 years later, it's Castos, River, and Rich. Even though CMHA does have some units in River Rich, they're 1s and 2s. It's not families. Here is where the black population of Columbus is headed. This is a development by M.I. Homes called Upper Albany West. More Black and African American households moved here than anywhere else in the metropolitan region. 3 census tracts, 72.140915. More Black folk moved there than anywhere else. Those are 3 census tracts that touch the city of New Albany. This pattern is so pronounced, New Albany High School now has an official NAACP chapter, as nearly 10% of New Albany High School students identify as Black alone. Steve? That is not. That's Columbus, and that subdivision in particular is Columbus City Schools. It is. But it represents the Northeast Franklin County shift. Why is that happening? History. Here's a map of where the Black population in Columbus lived in 1960. And where was most of the Black population? Well, there's Broad Street. 670 comes here. There's Bexley. Don't pay too much attention to that. This geography in orange has the same number of people living in it as right there. That area right there is at Livingston and Alum Creek. Does anybody know what neighborhood is at Alum Creek and Livingston? Thank you, ding, ding, ding. And what is special about Hanford Village? Yes, but before it was cut in half, what was Hanford Village built for? Buzz. Ding, ding, ding. Yep. So a subdivision built for Black returning GIs, which, a decade after those homes were built, that was where the decision was built to put that highway. There is a historical marker on Alum Creek Drive that talks about the history of Hanford Village. When I say Hanford Village, it's those story-and-a-half bungalows that kind of run in that little area. Did someone else have a comment they wanted to make about Hanford Village? Say a little louder, sir. There you go, thank you. That's 1960. Here's 1980. What was happening in the 1970s? Busing, right? So not only was there now white flight, the city's growing, the Black population's on the rise, now we have white flight, so the geography of the Black community is now shifting. Here we go to 2000, and even as recently as just 24 years ago, almost all Black and African American residents of the county were inside the Beltway. And here we are now in 2020. This is why New Albany would have a significant movement of the Black upper middle class moving there. What is this really clear line? That is the railroad track that runs along 71 from downtown to IKEA. And that has been a race demarcation line that is holding, but I want to point out 2 places where that is not true. How many of you, by a show of hands, have been to Cameron Mitchell's Bud Dairy Food Hall on North 4th Street? Anybody know how it went out of business? Right here, see this little bump? There's the railroad track, and here is this bump. And that bump is North 4th, 5th, 6th, and Grant, the only 4 streets to the west of that railroad track that never had prohibitions against people of color from living on the north side of the city. Those were the only 4 streets that people of color could live that side of the highway. So when the Ku Klux Klan had their convention at the fairgrounds, Bud Dairy decided to advertise in their program brochure. And the faith community in Italian Village and Wineland Park organized to tell their members, don't go to Bud Dairy anymore. How dare this business in our neighborhood, our mixed race neighborhood, do that? Bud Dairy went on the defense. It was too late. Bud Dairy went out of business. And it was one of the first examples in our country of a racial boycott for social justice. It put Bud Dairy out of business. That was 1935. Interestingly enough, Columbus City Council was a ward system prior to the 1920s. What was happening across the United States and in Columbus was the rise of socialism. We had a ward system. It was this area and campus and German Village that had elected socialists. And the Republicans and Democrats worked together to change the charter to no longer be a ward system, to go at large, and they knocked out socialism in the next round. Right? Republicans might have thought differently if they knew the future of what Columbus was going to be, right? Because then they're going to lose any position. In 2019, there was a candidate running for Columbus City Council, Liliana Bayman Riviera. She is pretty much a socialist. She did okay in the election. She won one place, the place that socialism won 100 years ago. History repeats itself. Right? The other place that's changing, right here, see how that's getting lighter? That's around Oakland Park Nursery. And this is where white housing consumers getting pushed out of Clintonville, Beechwood, and North Columbus are jumping that imaginary race line. It's a physical line, but it's racially imaginary. And they're buying those World War II bungalows that are now getting flipped, and they're going from $65,000 to $265,000, right? So they're a real value in the marketplace, but it's changing the identity of North Linden, and some of those housing consumers, Buzz, are starting to call that neighborhood something else, yes? They call it Kenmore Park, but I also hear some people refer to it as, West Clintonville. I'll call that a nervous chuckle. Right? The hair goes up on the back of the neck, right? Okay. What's happening with the white population in red is where you see significant population loss for the white community. And where is the white population dropping at the fastest rate? Oh, I don't know, Northland, Whitehall to Eastland, and from Franklinton all the way to the Westland Mall area. Think about those areas. Housing stock built in the 60s and 70s. It's good housing stock, simple, small rooms, lower ceiling heights, starting to age, kind of architecture unworthy of human affection is my line. It's not new enough to be competitive, not old enough to be interesting, but it's a good value in the marketplace. So as some of those original white consumers have aged in place and need to move on, who's replacing? New Americans. Whitehall lost 3.5% of all of its housing units in the last 10 years, but grew by over 11% in additional people. It's the first time in 60 years Whitehall is growing. Why is Whitehall growing? Older white single people in housing units are aging and moving on. Replacement population are families with kids. Whitehall is completely reinvigorated. One part of Whitehall lost 72% of its white population in a 10-year period. You see other locations in Eastland and Northland also doing the same. Where is the white population going? Mount Vernon Avenue and Long Street. Largest increase for white people was where the Urban League and the King Arts Complex is located. The white population in that portion of the Near East Side jumped 208%, and the Near East Side has never been this diverse. A previously redlined neighborhood is the destination of white incoming consumers. The Near East Side is losing children and seniors. It's adding white households. The white households that move in do not have kids. If they do have kids, they're not sending them to CCS. So the neighborhood is all of a sudden becoming racially diverse. Its schools are not. The most diverse place in the region is behind the Home Depot at West Broad and 270. And what do you see? That is a picture of the housing stock that's there. That's that early 1970s, good value in the marketplace. It's a great place for new Americans. What's the least diverse place, Margie? Specifically Upper Arlington behind Whole Foods. I picked on Margie because I've known her for 35 years. Arlington behind Whole Foods, right? And we're going to get into that. All right. Anybody who knows me, Buzz, Margie, know this house? It's my mom and dad's house. All right. This house is in Boardman, Ohio, less than a mile outside the city of Youngstown, right outside Youngstown South Side. 3,000 square foot house, 5 bedrooms, 3-car garage, in a neighborhood that looks like similar houses. This is the neighborhood I grew up in. My mom and dad lived there 47 years. We just sold that house 5 years ago. Anybody want to guess the price? $500,000. $137,000. Wow. 137. Youngstown and Columbus are not the same housing market. Okay? But the neighborhood I grew up in, 350 homes, all 350 were homeowners, and all 350 were white. And I just thought that's how my neighborhood organically evolved. I come to Columbus in 1988. I get a job renting apartments here, Morse Road in Westerville, in the Columbus School District, $295 a month townhouses. 60% of the subdivision or the apartment complex is white, 40% black. It's about 350 units. I work 20 hours a week, Monday through Friday. I'm the only employee on Saturday and Sunday. I'm told many things, two of which were the following. If I accept an application from a black applicant, do not assign that black applicant to a vacant unit near the rental office. So when white customers come onto the property, they think the apartment complex is more white than what it was. I'm also told that if I'm there on the weekend and I take an application from a black individual, to put a tick mark inside the letter R on the word rental application so the carbon copies, that dot would reveal itself and the downtown home office will know the race of the applicant, because I was specifically told the owners do not want the apartment complex to become majority minority because they won't be able to get the rental increases out of it they want. 1988, fair housing laws had changed when? 20 years earlier, right? That would be like us having laws from 2004. Do we think laws in 2004 that we don't like by 2024 everybody's following? No. There's no internet. You see where I grew up. What did I know? On chance of a moral compass given to me by my parents, I called down to the HUD office to tell them this is what I'm being instructed to do, and it doesn't feel good. And the person on the other end of the line tells me something like, I'm glad it doesn't feel good because you're breaking federal law. And hey, young college student, would you like to keep a log of every time your employer is telling you to break federal law and bust them? Yeah, I think so, right? I think so. It changed my life, right? I mean, for the last 35 years, I've kind of been working in this space, 20 years as a grant maker. And what I want you to understand about me, I'm struggling, man, right? I made a career out of this. And now I'm realizing that, oh, crap, right? Half my day, I'm working to dismantle systemic systems of oppression. The other half of the day, I'm perpetuating them unknowingly. I'll give examples of that as we go through the presentation, right? I'm not where I thought I was. I loved Robin DiAngelo's book, A White Woman Who Wrote really to white audiences about diversity. And I love this quote, right? How did you get the message that white is better? How do you talk about white neighborhoods? Good, safe, clean, desirable. Are those words for Clintonville? When you talk about Linden, is it dangerous and crime-ridden and to be avoided? While those are descriptions of physical places and housing, is it not also a description for the people who live there? How often are we talking about race and never using the word? You ask these questions, and I want you to answer these in your head. If people of color don't live in your neighborhood, why? Why do you think they don't? Because when I was 21, I just thought they just don't want to live here. No, right? Where do they live? Were you encouraged as a kid to go to neighborhoods different than the one you were growing up in? I was not in the 1980s. What was I told in Boardman? Drive on Glenwood or Market Street and don't go off those two main roads, because if you go off those two main roads, well, yeah, nothing's going to happen, right? That's what's going to happen. What about schools? When someone says, oh, yeah, get that house, they got great schools, what's the mental model of who's in that classroom? When someone says, oh, you don't want to live there, the schools are really bad, who's in that classroom? Is that a code for race? Yes. Did you talk about race? No. Here's where I live now. I live on 9th Avenue in the University District. I live on the same street my first apartment was on 35 years ago. So in 3.5 decades, I've gone a block. I live on the right side, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, no parking, rent the left side out, and I'm a gentrifier. My neighborhood has a 10% home ownership rate and a 75% poverty rate. I've been there 15 years. When I bought the place, 20% of all the houses in my neighborhood were vacant and abandoned. Now there's like 2. There are unintended consequences of where I chose to live. I live there so I can walk alongside and next to and learn, but I also have negative things that I'm contributing because as I've invested in my property, the neighborhood's invested, and even though a lot of affordable housing has gone into that area of North 4th Street and Summit, north of Italian Village, southeast of OSU, and you drive up those streets and you think what you see is gentrification, a lot of times you're just seeing a nonprofit property owner and developer that's just maintaining a much better product. I share with you where I grew up, where I worked, and where I live now to say the following to you. This is not about judgment of where you have lived previously, where you live now, but I challenge you all to think about the following thing when you leave here. What has your housing journey been? Why was it that way? What is the neighborhood like that you live in now? How did you get there? What do you do with the knowledge you have of the place in which you live? And what do you want to do with your backstory and these complex issues tomorrow about the community in which you live? So it's about how do we move to greater justice, and I will give you some examples and tools on how to do that. We now understand that we've been chronically underbuilding. I've already identified that that's 5,500 people every year where there's nowhere to put your head on a pillow. Construction has been stuck right here. Oh, there's my typo for the day. 9,000 units every year. We need 14,000 units just to match growth. And a lot of analysts say we have to double the amount of housing construction that you see in order to dig us out of where we are. We now have the greatest scarcity of available housing ever recorded. And here's what that means. In 2010, there were 107 housing units for every 100 households. That's a pretty good housing market. There are 7 units sitting available in the marketplace. By 2020, it was down to 102. That's why it feels so tight. If we don't substantially build more housing, we'll be at 96 units out of 100 households by 2030. I think we're in for a rough go if we don't change behavior. It's causing this. This is the median price point for Franklin County communities as of last summer. In red are the top 1/3 price point. Middle light blue is the middle tier, and the dark blue is the lower 3rd tier. They are designed on this map based on the geography. What do you notice about the dark blue color? It's on the southern end of the map. Why is the lower cost housing generally on the south end of a city? That's where sewage and industrial waste would flow, so wealthy housing was never built south of a city in historical times, at least if that's the way the water flowed. We also have these conditions that are happening across the city, right? Hopefully you've been watching in the Columbus Dispatch. The first would be in the middle, latitude 525, right? Where last year, right before Christmas, the pipes burst. The city had to emergency move people into housing. We've got Galloway Village and, of course, Colonial Village, which is the one not too far from Bexley, where 800 Haitians had come to Columbus and were living in deplorable conditions, getting leases in units with no electricity or heat. Who's getting taken advantage of in these properties? Low-income people, but disproportionately people of color, right? Michael Stenziano just came out with some lovely emails about your home value. What do you see about how that's playing out? Everybody's home value is not going up at the same rate. The county's up 41 or 42%, but look at good old Whitehall. What? Homes in Whitehall jumped 68% in value in 36 months? Hamilton local. This tells a story. This tells a better one. This is a block by block map of where those property values are jumping at the fastest rate. So the Columbus number doesn't tell the whole story. This does. Oh, by the way, if you don't see color on the map, That's because that area is not really appreciating at the same rate. Where do you see a lot of blank stuff? Well, Arlington's not really dark. This is the whole Clintonville, High Street down through campus, the short north, downtown, German Village. It's all pale. Why is that North High Street corridor pale? Because those neighborhoods have appreciated every 3 years like clockwork in perpetuity. They've always been gaining. Black and brown neighborhoods that have been, their values have been suppressed by redlining, restrictive covenants, urban renewal, highway building, and busing. The growth of the region's accelerating. The growth is moving inward. There's not enough housing. Where are the cheapest houses in the market? In the neighborhoods that have been disadvantaged for decades, the brown and black neighborhoods. So where are you seeing the fastest jumps? Franklinton, south of Children's Hospital, there's our lovely Cleveland Avenue corridor, right? It's hitting Linden and Milo Grogan. Some of these neighborhoods are feeling 20 years of value appreciation in 36 months. And that's causing great anxiety in those places. We're not building enough housing. This is my chart that shows this huge increase in rental housing. Did anybody see the article in the Dispatch yesterday that apartment rents in Columbus did what, Margie? Remember the article? Yes. Third highest increase in rents in the United States. New York City, number 1. Northern New Jersey, number 2. Columbus, Ohio was number 3. Scarcity is a problem. Scarcity is a problem, but geography is too. I've been using these maps for a long time by the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. And they are collecting data in these broad categories, in these 4 buckets: neighborhoods, jobs, health and safety, and education. We can collect that data and we can map that data, and they believe these indicators are opportunity. Here is that map. The map on the left is the county. The map on the right is urban Columbus. The darker the color, the greater the level of opportunity. Where is opportunity? Bexley, German Village. There's Parsons Avenue, right? Here you go through Victorian Village, Grandview, Arlington, Clintonville. That's Ohio State's campus, not shaded. Pale yellow is concentrated poverty. If the growth of the region's accelerating, if the housing market's not performing, if this were Dayton or Cleveland, and you were here, and these neighborhoods were struggling, you might feel vulnerable, right? Because your neighborhood might what? Get pulled down by the problems across the street. But if there's not enough housing, and the population's growing faster than the housing market, and you live in a city that's on the rise, the prosperity of these places is going to do what? Spill the prosperity over, as opposed to the problem spilling this way. Because that's the housing market behaving in the way it needs to behave. That's the geography of opportunity. We are not experiencing the same city. But then, as you said, now let's layer in race. The map on the left is where Asians live in Central Ohio. The map on the right is where the white population lives. What do you notice about the map on the left? Not a lot of Asians living in low-income parts, except the west side. But for the most part, Asian Columbus lives in moderate to very high opportunity neighborhoods. Go over here to the white population. Not a lot of white folk living in the neighborhoods that struggle, except for Sullivan Avenue and West Broad. Right? Interesting comparison. This one's more interesting for me. The map on the left is Hispanic Columbus. The map on the right is Black and African American. Look at the map on the left. What do you notice? It's past Bexley into Whitehall, out towards McNaughton and Maine 270. It's Hilltop, but it's leapfrogged outside 270. And it's further north heading into Westerville. But 70% of Black and African American households live in the lowest opportunity neighborhoods, which means Black and African American Columbus is just simply removed from where that opportunity lies. So already by age 5, an African American child in Franklin County is already going to be way behind and physically disconnected from where opportunity lies. Here's a map that shows where young people in our city live through the lens of race. Here's that line, Interstate 71. Young people, red, by the way, is black youth, blue is white youth. Youth in our community are living more hyper-racially segregated than the general population. I love this quote by Jonathan Kozol. I've read his works for a long time when he says, an awful lot of people come to college with this strange idea that there's no longer segregation in America's schools. Neither of those things are true. If you look at the 30 high schools that are sending the most kids to the Ohio State University, 29 of the 30 are suburban Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. The only one not in the 3 Cs is Centerville and Dayton. This was probably 4-year-old data. Of 7,000 incoming freshmen to Ohio State, I think in that year, 117 were black males. Is it the admissions office job at The Ohio State University to fix the way we fund schools in Ohio? Is it Ohio State's admission process to fix housing policy and neighborhoods? No. But who gets a 29.6 on their ACT these days? Not kids from Linden McKinley, not kids from Columbus South. Is that kid's problem? No. Your family's income is the most likely contributors to whether or not you're going to have access. And so the last data I found from the economic census shows this. This was from 2016. Look at the 5 highest tracks. This is net wealth for 15 to 24-year-olds in 2016. South of Lane Avenue, behind Whole Foods, 15 to 24-year-olds were also already sitting on $570,000 of net wealth. Bexley makes it in there too. Yet in Franklinton, Mount Vernon, Long, out by the Afrocentric School, Fairmore, south of Maine, look at the income inequality. It's 70 to 1 between the top and the bottom. 40 years later, what's going on with income segregation in Columbus? Those are 2 different census tracts in North Upper Arlington, where net wealth for 55 to 64-year-olds is now at 3 million. Look at net wealth in Mount Vernon. It hasn't budged in 40 years for people. It's not about how much money's in the American economy. It is about how that money is distributed and how history contributes to that. Where you live matters, and we now understand in deeper ways how that plays out. So now let's talk about history. 3 kinds of zoning came to this country. We've had racial, expulsion, and exclusionary. Racial is exactly what it says. Expulsive means we don't want factories next to our houses, and exclusionary means wealthy people over here, low-income people over there. Zoning comes to this country from Germany. It's really about separation of uses. It's setback, it's height, it's all that stuff about the physical structure, but we're America, and we're a diverse country, so we gotta weave some race in there, right? So Baltimore was the first American city to deploy a race zoning code. It was struck down by the courts pretty quickly and moved into the private sector. Here is a picture of that 1910 Baltimore official city plan. Read that quote. I love the fact that the word quarantine is in that quote, given what we just have come through these last couple years. The whole justification of a race zoning code was so people of color wouldn't give communicable diseases to white people. That was the official public plan. So that gets struck down by the courts. It goes into the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, surveyors hired by banks and insurance companies, and they're going out into America's neighborhoods in nearly 300 US cities, and they're looking at the physical and social characteristics of our neighborhoods. The physical. When it rains, is there sewage in the street? Is the rendering plant right next door to where people live, right? Are properties deteriorated? And if they meet those criteria, we're going to score the neighborhood lower. The other issue is we're going to look at the race and culture of who lives in those neighborhoods, and if certain conditions are met with the demographics, we will also score that neighborhood lower. Here are some quotes taken from some of those HOLC cards that represent some of the commentary they put on those cards. We couldn't find any for Columbus. 5% of a neighborhood, which means the whole neighborhood gets redlined, meaning the 95% of the neighborhood that is white also now doesn't have access to financial tools because the fear that the 5% of the neighborhood is going to do what? Grow. Bexley is a grid. The Near East Side is a grid. Does anybody know why the grid after World War II started to be, we moved away from the grid and went to curvilinear streets with cul-de-sacs and subdivisions with a single entrance, and then you'd get your 350 houses off a single entrance? Why did buildings start doing that? Car, security for what? A racial security. Because if you got a grid pattern of streets, people of color can move half a block. They can move 1 block, right? As the population of a racial community grows, it's easier to move a few doors down the street. It's a lot harder to move into a subdivision with a single entrance with 350 houses with curvilinear streets and cul-de-sacs. And guess what? Banks wouldn't fund to developers who'd build on grids because it didn't give them racial protection, right? A subdivision gave you protection. So the grid went away because it's too impermeable. Here's that map that those assessors created in nearly 300 American cities. In green are the neighborhoods that were Tier 1 or preferred neighborhoods. Arlington, Clintonville, Bexley, Westgate. In pink are those neighborhoods that were Tier 4 or hazardous. They were hazardous because of the physicality. They were hazardous because who lived there. What's hazardous? Oh my goodness, Mount Vernon Avenue and Long Street, Milo Grogan, the tier of Linden, the edges of the short north, and all of Franklinton. And what's right here? Livingston Avenue at Parsons. Here are some pictures when those HOLC assessors were surveying our city. I love the quotes along the bottom. Here's the foreign section north of Steelton Industries, right? Buckeye Steel Yards on the south side. Had a lot of immigrants, like my grandparents. Colored section of East Long Street. This is essentially where Columbus State, or 71 and 670 is now located. Here's another picture of Naughton Street. This is essentially where Columbus State Community College is, which was all an urban renewal area. Foreigners living just east. Here's another picture of Harrison West. I love the wrap around the spare tire, right? Because it wasn't just black, it was also Italian, it was Jewish, right? Everybody knows that, one of Bexley's strengths, right, was it was built because Jewish people weren't allowed access to Arlington. Patricia Burgess published a book from OSU Press, Planning in the Private Interest, and she tracked that nearly 70% of every house built in Franklin County in the first half of the decade had a racial restriction. It happened in the suburbs, it happened in the city. The terms on the right side of this slide are very uncomfortable to read, and I won't say them, but they're printed in real estate documents by the thousands. Here's the marketing brochure for the lots south behind Whole Foods in Arlington when King Thompson built Upper Arlington. And what do you see right there? Restricted. 1,000 acres. It's restricted by architecture, lot size, building materials, and the race of who gets to live south of Lane. On page 4 of this multi-page, really nice document, it has a picture that says, Arlington will never be this. And it's a picture 1 block from my house. And why? Because right by where I live in the University District, there's duplexes and singles and row houses and corner stores. And what was happening at that time was separation of uses. What is specifically unique about Arlington south of Lane? It's a little bit of a grid, but it also gets into curvilinear streets, right? Everybody know who designed Central Park? Frederick Law Olmsted? Anybody know what he did before he got the job to design the park? Because he had never designed a park in his life. His first job was Central Park. He was a writer. Frederick Law Olmsted wrote a piece that described what it should feel like when you go into a park. It wasn't about how many gallons should be in the lake or how tall the portal pylon should be at a gateway entrance. It was about an emotional connection. But the bridle paths in Central Park get replicated in this curvilinear pattern, right? No one wants to live on the grid. That's urban and gritty. So let's build curvilinear streets, because if the street curves, I see trees. So Arlington's going strong. And by the way, I'm not picking on Arlington because Columbus neighborhoods and everywhere else was doing it, right? This is just an example. Because right here, the president of the Ohio Real Estate Commission was accused of blocking a black doctor from buying a house in Arlington. And it was this house. A black MD from New Jersey was moving to Columbus to work at the Ohio State University. He was trying to buy this house in Arlington, and the Northwest Arlington Homeowners Association organized, bought the house out from under that black doctor, flipped it to King Thompson, the original builder of the neighborhood. They were found guilty by a Franklin County judge. The Northwest Arlington Homeowners Association was ordered to be disbanded because in 1970, they were intentionally circumventing fair housing laws. Just like 18 years later, I'm out there at Morrison Westerville Road. It's still going on. Anybody read this book, Secret Center of the Parking Lot? Local historian that talked about the fact that the Arlington High School, which recently did an expansion and renovation, there was in fact a black cemetery that was there that they did not remove the bodies. Just like what's happening at the North Market, this was a common practice. And so Arlington did the right thing and exhumed those bodies and did the right thing. But at that time, much of Arlington was owned by a black man named Pleasant Litchford. And at the time, you actually had to pay a fee if you were a black individual to own real estate. Not only did you have to pay an additional surcharge as a black person buying real estate, you had to have a signed affidavit from 2 white people to say that you wouldn't cause problems. That was in the 1800s. Redlining and restrictive covenants still live with us today, right? Here's just a list of those things that still live with us. You can go to Google Satellite, and you can figure out what neighborhoods were redlined by looking at Google Satellite. More on that in a minute. World War II ends. We move from a war economy to a neighborhood and home building economy, which was the right thing to do. It was a perfect storm, right, in a good way to jumpstart that American economy. Federal government starts getting into the housing business, not the war business. Now we get Hanford Village, right? The one example where black returning GIs got access to financial tools because 99% of all of the federal housing tools that came out after World War II only went to white folk. Hanford Village, the rare example, and then they build the highway through it. So here's the government opening up the suburbs. And now we get back to Parsons and Livingston. The 1930s, Parsons and Livingston is what redlined because of the demographics of who is there. This is a 14-year snapshot. 14 years ago was 2010. That feels like 2 weeks ago to me. Parsons, Livingston. Anybody want to know what this area outlined in yellow is? Children's Hospital. Look at that. It's a hazardous neighborhood. We got to fix the hazard. Let's put the highway there. Oh, we still have a bigger hazard. Let's do urban renewal, right? So as you probably remember, this was that terrible shopping center that had a Kroger and a CVS, and there was like Long John Silver's and a car dealership. Wendy's, yeah, Wendy's. Milo Grogan gets split right in half as 71 makes that neighborhood 2 neighborhoods. Linden, if you did not know this, was Linden Heights. It was its own suburb. It annexed into Columbus to get access to water and sewer lines. Shortly after that annexation, what happens? Construction of Interstate 71. Here's the intersection of Hudson and 71 in Linden. Think about where the Lowe's is and the old Map-Free Stadium and all that came down. You couldn't get from Cleveland Avenue over to Indianola for all those years. You lost all those housing consumers. What do you think was happening with the commercial viability of Cleveland Avenue when all that was going on? Not good, right? Because you had this healthy Cleveland Avenue, you had Northern Lights, then it goes to Morse, then it goes to 161, then it goes to Polaris. Linden was not historically a black neighborhood. It was white. But these patterns started to cause a racial change for Linden. And then here comes busing, right after the highways. In a single year, half the white children left Linden McKinley High School for fear of what was coming, even though Linden was still predominantly white when busing came. In the 7 years between when the Columbus desegregation case was filed and when the first buses rolled for desegregation, 37,000 children left the Columbus School District. Almost all of them were white. There's a 1980 Columbus Monthly article that is 21 pages long that talks about 1 year after busing, and it is very clear it's over for Columbus City Schools. They will never recover from that decision. The real issue was the housing market, not just the schools. This will cause exacerbated white flight, and Columbus schools will never recover academically. And I'm telling you, if you read that article, it's as if it were written today as a look back. No one in this room should be surprised that 86% of black third graders in CCS are struggling to pass their third grade reading. It's a crisis, and COVID was a death knell. Virtual learning was not good. Okay. In the 1940s, we had a ownership gap between white America and black America of 23%. By the 2020 census, that had widened to 31%. Who's benefiting off the housing market in 2024? 75% of white American households own their home. 44% of black America owns their home. And who just made $89,000 in 36 months off their house? The average person in Columbus. But disproportionately, that wealth continues to go to white households. Why? Because of systemic historical systems. While we ended a practice of redlining or restrictive covenants, while we stopped urban renewal, we never did restorative justice. So it's inequity, inequity, inequity. Oh, level playing field. No, it's not. Black households are far more likely to live in those red line neighborhoods. What's happening in those red line neighborhoods? Every dot on this map is where a home is getting a building permit or getting flipped by the city of Columbus over the last 10 years. The only reason why Linden, Franklinton, south of Children's Hospital can be experiencing what they are experiencing because it is the culmination of systemic systems of oppression that are now manifesting themselves in new ways. So black and brown neighborhoods were getting hurt for decades as those neighborhoods were doing what? Being pulled down. The growth of the region's going up. People are moving in. There's not enough housing. Now brown and black neighborhoods are being hurt all over again, but not as the neighborhood is being pushed down, but as the neighborhood's being pushed up. I think we're going to look back on this period of US history, and we'll judge it with the same dissatisfaction as we look back on redlining. Here's redlining on the left. There's the foreclosure crisis on the right. Where was the foreclosure crisis? Linden, south of Children's, Hilltop. Redlining map on the left. Again, pink is the hazardous neighborhoods. The darker the color on the right is where the private sector is still issuing predatory loans. Where is that happening? Oh, Parsons Avenue, Franklinton. There's that railroad track that runs along 71. There's Linden. The government's not doing it, but the private sector still is. We at United Way map social conditions, and they all look exactly the same. It doesn't matter what, any nonprofit's going to give me a map, I already know what it's going to say, right? Here's infant mortality. Some of these places outlined in black have infant mortality rates like a developing nation. Here's that opportunity map. The greater the level red, the higher the income for the city of Columbus. The pale is poverty. Every dot is where the victim or the shooter was a kid. Is there a direct correlation between youth gun violence and the economic stability of your family? Yeah. Here's, it's old now, but Legal Aid Society, it's a heat map of evictions. Linden, Near East, south of Children's, Hilltop. 22% of Franklin County households are headed by women. Don't have completely accurate data, but we believe close to 70% of all evictions are female-headed households, predominantly African American. Here's where people lived right before they went to jail. There's Parsons. Oh, Bexley. Not a lot of people going to jail in Bexley. Food pantry use mapped by Hidden Food Bank, and here's life expectancy. In red is up to a 24-year difference in life expectancy than the areas in blue. I grew up in Arlington. For 35 years, I've been living in red. My life expectancy isn't suppressed by where I've been living since I was 21. My life expectancy is rooted in the privilege I had, the education I got, the stability that I had. I am a beneficiary of racist systems. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with my privilege in a more meaningful way. Wrap it up. History is alive and it's everywhere. Most of the times you can't see it, sometimes you can. Social justice is not any more complicated than a very simple sentence. Who gets to live on a tree-lined street? The answer should be very clear, everybody. A year ago, August, 16 US cities were all mapped between 6 and 7 a.m., 3 and 4 p.m., and again at 6 and 7 p.m. 200 people in Columbus did this assignment. Everybody's vehicle was attached with 2 devices. One was measuring pollution particulate matter. The other was measuring the heat of the neighborhood. Are low-income children breathing in more toxins? And what's the heat of the neighborhood? What happened during COVID? School closed, the rec center closed, the social service agency closed. What happened with crime in our country? Went up. Where did it go up? It skyrocketed in Linden and Hilltop. And who did it skyrocket with? Kids. Hia boys, right? If you look at the age of who's shooting guns and who's getting shot, every year in Columbus, that age is going down. Right? Here's the map of our city before the sun comes up. And low-income neighborhoods are already 12 degrees hotter than wealthy neighborhoods. Why? Because those low-income neighborhoods are holding all that residual heat from the night before because there's no frickin' trees. If you go to Google Satellite, if you can see rooftops and sidewalks and parking lots and streets, that neighborhood's probably redlined. If you go to Google Satellite and you look at Clintonville, it looks like, I don't know, Wayne National Forest. So I decided I'm going to drive around in my car, and I'm going to take pictures in Tier 1 redline neighborhoods, and I'm going to take pictures of hazardous neighborhoods, and what do I see out my windshield? There's Linden, less than a mile from my house, compared to Arlington. What? Near East Side, had a few blocks into Bexley. What? And 2 Columbus neighborhoods, because I want to pick on a city versus suburban comparison. Milo Grogan compared to Clintonville. They're not that far apart. They're worlds apart, right? Worlds apart. Who deserves to live on tree-lined streets? By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, low-income neighborhoods can be 23 degrees hotter. Think about Linden. Grandparents raising grandkids on fixed income, not able to pay for that air conditioning bill. So now you've got the toxicity of being poor, and now your neighborhood's burning up, and the rec center and the social service agency and the school is virtual, and what do you think's going on? Because I don't know about you, right? You're a teenager, you got a lot of aggression, you got a lot of energy, and you got a lot of toxicity heading your way. How else do we expect people are going to respond to that environment? Here's where we end. We're overwhelmed by it. We don't know what to do. But I have some thoughts. There's 4 things that I'm going to leave you with so excited for. By a show of hands, how many of you know the word link us and what it means? That's pretty good. That's really good, by the way. Zone in. That's really good. Columbus Affordable Housing Bonds. Yeah, okay. And then lastly, source of income. I knew I'd get hands on the back. These are 4 things that we have to decide on right now for our future where we can begin to do restorative justice. Link us. You will be asked, if you live in this county, to vote on an $8 billion plan in November. It's called Link Us. It's going to link us on transit, on our feet, and on our bicycles. It will build permanent bus rapid transit. One of those corridors is right in front of this building on Main Street. What is bus rapid transit? It's a double bus connected by the accordion strip. Stations are in the middle. What does that mean? When that double bus pulls up, all 4 doors open at once, everybody exits at once. You can enter all 4 doors at once like a light rail train because all of the financial transaction no longer occurs at the fare box. It occurs on the station. So that bus stops for seconds, not a couple minutes. Bus rapid transit also has advanced signalization, so that bus rapid transit's going to communicate to the red light, and it's always going to get a green light. So the speed and efficiency is dramatically increased. Bless you. So now you have efficiency, you have volume, and now people can start to organize their life around transit connections. Main Street to Reynoldsburg, Broad to the casino, Olentangy River Road to Northwest Columbus will all be rebuilt as these rapid corridors. But how many times you drive around the city and you see people standing waiting for a COTA bus, and they're next to a stick in the gravel next to a road, there's no shelter, there's no sidewalk, and there ain't no dignity in any of it. That's wrong. Wilkos will not only do bus rapid transit, it'll provide that connectivity, give people dignity in bike lanes, bike trails, and riding transit. Those are the three components of Wilkos. 270 was decided in 1953. It finished in 1977. It took 24 years to build, and when it opened, the Columbus Dispatch called it a waste of money and the road to nowhere. And it irrevocably reshaped our urban geography, and no one voted on it. This is your first time in 70 frickin' years to fix that problem. I need you to vote for it, and I need you to tell everybody else to vote for it. COTA is a main part of Wilkos, but this is everyone from Metro Parks to the city of Columbus to COTA. It's not a COTA levy because it is bike lanes, bike trails, and sidewalks, but most of the money will go to improve COTA. Okay? Next, we've already talked about zoning and what it's done to this country, and the city of Columbus has now admitted the zoning code is racist and it's about the car, and they're throwing it out. Those are the things they're doing with the zoning code. And I know when I was here last month, the mayor of Bexley had to hightail it out of here to get to a committee meeting to talk about zoning in Bexley so Bexley can diversify its housing stock. The next would be the city of Columbus. We all know what bond packages are for, right? We always show up, and if you live in the city of Columbus, you're always voting on those bond packages, right? And it's sewer lines and bridges and street lights and all that kind of stuff. And in 2019, for the first time in Columbus history, the city of Columbus put in $50 million in that bond package for housing, and they turned that $50 million blank check into $250 million of affordable housing construction, and 1,300 units of affordable housing were incubated because the voters of Columbus backed those bonds and turned that money over to city council to say, we think it's a public purpose to not just do sewer lines and streetlights and bridges, we should build housing. And then 14 months ago, by a supermajority, the voters of Columbus handed a $200 million blank check to solve our city's housing problem, and the city of Columbus intends to turn that into $1 billion in construction. No suburban community has stepped up to the plate, right? The city of Columbus is doing a lot. It's only 45% of the metropolitan region. Worthington is considering a ballot initiative there that would raise funds to match what Columbus did in 2019. Source of income. Prior to source of income, landlords would only look at your W-2 to qualify you for your income eligibility. They would not look at alimony, child support, veterans benefits, Section 8. Only 6 places in the state of Ohio had given that protection, and who was the first community in Franklin County to do it? Bexley, right? Does everybody know that? Bexley was the first community in Franklin County to say, we're going to stand up for housing justice, and all legal sources of income now must be included. Now, what's important about Bexley doing that, Bexley doesn't have many apartments, and it doesn't have a lot of apartments that are really going to matter in the ecosystem. But Bexley's intellectual leadership set that stage. And Bexley said, we can do it here. And after Bexley did it, Westerville, Worthington, Gahanna, Whitehall, and Columbus have all followed. And in Columbus, they went a little further to say, you now must get a receipt when you pay rent, and you must be given 90 days to pay your security deposit. If I need to get out of a deplorable housing condition, but I don't have the resources to do that until I get my deposit back, I'm stuck in a crappy place. That's no longer true for families in Columbus. It is struggling to get to the finish line in Grandview. There is a movement in Arlington called Equal UA. There's a lot of really great stuff happening in Upper Arlington around equity and housing. But you know, the Dublin, the Hilliards, the Grove Cities, there's a lot of places where we need to move. So with that, I'll stay for questions. We'll open it up. Thank you, thank you, thank you for staying and listening. What time is it? I went really long, didn't I? What time is it? Did I go really long? I went really long, didn't I?
No, you're good. If anyone does have questions, if you can just raise your hand so we can bring the mic over. That way those viewing online can hear what is asked.
And if you want to get on with your evening, I won't be.
Thank you, Michael, as always. A little random, you talked about Whitehall and how exponentially the number of children's growing. What is the Whitehall School District going to do about that?
Well, thank you. United Way of Central Ohio has changed our entire business model, and everything we do moving forward is called Success by Third Grade. You learn how to read by third grade, and then at fourth grade, you have to read to learn. And if you look at what's happening with academic achievement as poverty and economic vulnerability is moving northeast and east. I mean, poverty is really moving east. It's leapfrogged over Bexley, but it's got a hold on Whitehall and it's right on into Reynoldsburg. And poverty is moving up Westerville and Cleveland Avenue. So when COVID came, academic achievement scores fell in every single Franklin County school district. Bexley, Grandview, Arlington, Dublin, Olentangy, and New Albany saw their academic achievement scores fall 2 points to 8 points. Columbus, Whitehall, Westerville, Gahanna, Groveport, Southwestern, and did I say Groveport? They saw their academic achievement scores fall 22 to 30 percentage points. The first group have already recovered. The second group has not. Why did academic achievement scores tank heading northeast and east? Because that's where poverty is going. Poverty is moving away from downtown, and it's not going to Arlington, Dublin, and Delaware County. In Whitehall in particular, every single elementary school is now at full capacity, and ESL in Whitehall is huge. And Whitehall has been a leader with us in what is the issue around third grade academic achievement is not about the schools or teachers or administrators not being good at their jobs. It's about what is or is not happening in the home and the community. What Whitehall lacks is a strong social service safety net because Whitehall has not had a culture of that need until now, right? Where was that need before? Near East Side, Franklinton, Hilltop, right? As economic need moves, those social service agencies can't get out there quick enough. And Whitehall is probably the poster child for what is the suburbanization of poverty. But because it's a new American population, you have large families with large family constructs, which means you have multiple adults in the home that can help with family stability and homework and all those other things. So Whitehall is a very good example of a small community with a great leadership, both across city government and within the schools, that's really focused on that. And we're working to support them to bring those wraparound services for those kids so they can, in 10 years, maybe go get a job at Intel. Where right now, a lot of the kids that are struggling in those districts are not going to be able to take advantage of Columbus's jobs of the future. We have a very, very high level of educational attainment in this county. That is not because we have a very connected K through 12 pipeline where people who grow up in Franklin County are taking access to our educational institutions and then getting the jobs here. We're importing that talent from suburban Cleveland, suburban Cincinnati, and around the world, and they often stay. But what that means is that pipeline for kids in Whitehall and Hilltop and Linden is not connected, and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about Columbus City Schools and how the study that was 30 years ago is kind of representative of now. Do you think that Columbus City Schools will sort of like fail? Will there be like a revamping at all, or like?
So my comment, and thank you for that clarification, right? The article was 40 years ago. It was really about, these broader systems. What I want you to hear, the challenges of Columbus City Schools, I am not putting that burden and responsibility on the feet of teachers, the administrators, or the school board. I am putting that responsibility on the feet of broken systems that are keeping certain groups of people, right, through the lens of race and geography, without access to opportunity. Until we fix those other systems, I don't think you're going to see measurable improvement. I mean, there are things that can be done, but you don't see examples in this country of large urban school districts which are taking the responsibility to house the region's poor, where you see academic success. And that leads me with one more observation, and that is economic self-sufficiency on the urban periphery is not a sufficient defense for isolationism. Dublin and New Albany and Bexley will do better when Columbus does better. And I think people in Bexley and Arlington and Grandview, they get it. And by the way, if you look at children's service levies, CODA levies, and ADAM-H, adult mental health and drug addiction levies, where do they always win? Bexley. Where else do they win? Grandview, Worthington, Arlington. And where do they lose? They always lose. Dublin, New Albany, Gahanna, Pickerington, right? Groveport, Canal, Winchester, Grove City, Hilliard. 270 is a social and intellectual Berlin Wall, right? It just is. If I live in Dublin and work in New Albany and I'm driving that northern outer belt, do you think I understand buses? And why would I be motivated to increase my taxes to support something I don't see and I don't use and I don't know anyone who uses it? You live in Bexley, you're probably not using CODA or children's services or adult mental health services disproportionately, but you understand the value in it, right? I think people in Bexley and Grandview and Arlington know instinctively if Columbus does better, it's good for Bexley. And they vote for things to support that social safety net. We have not done a very good job, in my opinion, of articulating a business case and a moral case as to why transit, children's services, education, adult mental health is really important to the overall health of our region, because the continued prosperity of Central Ohio is no guarantee, right? So we have to, I think, in my opinion, be rooted in that from the ground. But if we don't look at changing systems, CCS will always be held captive. Buzz. Oh, did I interrupt the chain? I'm going to let Ben. Oh, he's bringing you a microphone.
I firmly agree with you. One of the things, my wife's a retired Columbus Public School teacher, so she spent a lot of years, all of those years were in the inner city or on the hilltop. What my concern is this was only the second time in my life I voted against a school levy.
Tell me.
And the reason that I voted against it is they don't have a plan. And the money that they're going to allocate, until you accurately define a problem, you're just throwing money. And a problem has, I don't know if you ever read the book Outliers, but what takes place is summer comes around. We have school we got out of school during the summer. We were an agrarian society, that sort of thing worked. So kids that don't get the kind of stimulus that my grandkids have through the summer come back in August or September. The kids that are low income and poverty and their summer activity is to come home before the street lights go on. So what you do is you start out in pre-kindergarten with a difference. Suburban kids, by the time they're in the first grade, they have heard over 41,000 more words. So now you have a kindergarten teacher who's going to take the class and say, I got to bring half that class up. So I have to teach them a year and a half worth of information in that time. And then you have first grade, and it repeats itself. You have stimulus for one group of people, stimulus for those, come the beginning of the year, and the disparity increases. There is the reason, in part, that the third grade was earmarked is that there is a direct correlation between being able to read at grade level in the third grade and prison.
Yep.
And the dropout rate starts to increase after fourth grade. You can only hold a child back for 1 year. Then after that, there's frustration. If you can't read, you can't do any of the other coursework. And so we say, oh, those high schools have those terrible dropout rates. That's not where it started.
No.
And until we define the problem, and I think in part it's to have year-round school, we're just going to keep paying more in property tax and getting the same result.
Well, I'm not an educator, right? I want to debate the merits of kind of the levy there, and you and I have known each other a long time. We could talk about that offline. What I do want to comment on is they had done surveys prior to the election, and all of those surveys showed that the levy was going down to defeat. The NAACP was against it. The Black Baptist Ministers Group was against the school levy, and the Equity Now Coalition was against the school levy, and it passed by 10 points. And it was a tax. It cost me $1,000, right? And I went in there and I gladly pushed yes. What's fascinating, if you look at the geography of who voted and who didn't vote for the Columbus school levy, the Columbus school levy failed in 3 places. It lost Morse Road towards Westerville. It lost Hamilton Road out towards Broad, Livingston, Maine, and McNaughton at 270, and it lost at Demarest, Climb, and Georgesville. So the school levy lost on the northeast, far east, and southwest edge, and it won everywhere else. And it handedly won in every black neighborhood, and it easily won in wealthy white neighborhoods. The Short North and Victorian Village and Clintonville overwhelmingly said yes to the schools, even though it was going to cost them a lot of money, and they don't put their kids in CCS. In my opinion, I interpret that as they have education, they value it, and want it for others. And let me tell you, the last 3 years was terrible. It was terrible. And so what did those voters in Linden and the Hilltop and Driving Park do when they went into the voting booth? I want my school to have air conditioning. I want the teachers to be paid. I want there to be mental health counselors. I don't want to get into the mess about sell this real estate or who's doing what on the Board of Education. My kids need what they need in that classroom, and I'm going to push that button, and I will always push that button. There's all that noise. Money's not going to fix it, but lack of money isn't going to fix it either. And CCS doesn't have what they need. That's my point. What else? Thank you.
Okay. So I live in a Northland neighborhood, and my husband and I are heavily involved in the Civic Association and the local Columbus City Elementary School there, and we're really at the crosshairs of this intersection between population shifting. And one thing that you said is that you want there to be spaces to create conversations to help people understand this and navigate, these shifting dynamics in their neighborhoods and how to do that well. And so I guess that's what my question for you is do you have any advice or counsel around how, for those of us who are in those situations, on how do we do this well?
So we can have lots of conversations. A quick tool, there's an organization called Compassionate Communication of Central Ohio, and they teach you techniques on how to deal with diverse and sometimes unpleasant situation. So just a simple example of that is when someone shows up at a public meeting and they're elevated, right? A really good tool is to say, I can see that this really matters to you, right? Acknowledging people, hearing people, right? Listening. And I commend you for your service to your community. I think the other thing would be is a lot of us white folk need to, unlike me, not talk too much, right? We need to show up in those spaces and listen. And I have a story I have to tell you real quick. I go into the closed Value City furniture store on Morse Road that's now the International Mall, right, next to the Board of Elections. And I go there with a neighbor of mine who's got some mental health issues. It's a Friday night. It's not busy with customers. But if you know this place, it's similar to Global Mall, but it's mostly clothing stores for women. I go into this one nice shop. It can't be larger than this area. It's got jewelry and some clothing. There is a Somali woman in a hijab working there, and I start talking to her. She moved to Columbus in 1995. I say, how do you like living in Columbus? And she goes, it's good. And I'm like, well, your verbal words and your emotional words were not the same, so tell me more. And she said, well, you know, it's been really good, but ever since Trump ran for office, it's been hard for my family. She said, because now we stop at red lights and a random person just yells at my family of 5, go back home. And my 3 kids don't know what that means because they were born here. And she says, we'll go to Somali Community Association events, and our kids just really aren't that interested. And because I was asking her, like, what's the relation between you and your kids, right? And she goes, I wish my kids were more interested in their home culture. And she caught herself, and she tilted her head, and she goes, oh, this is their home country, right? Like, that's my home country and my kids' home country are not the same. Okay, so we're having all this conversation. She's in the Columbus Hilliard schools. She specifically went to Hilliard schools because of the kind of diversity out there, particularly a lot of Muslim in Hilliard, right? And then my neighbor's running around, and he pops back in, and he goes, you guys are still talking? And he points her, and he goes, you shouldn't even be talking to him because he's gay. And do you want to know what the woman in the hijab said to me? That's frickin' hilarious. I have a whole movie set of how that could go with the two of us. She looks at me and she says, whatever God you have, whatever religion you practice, you're exactly who you were meant to be. And she said something, I mean, I almost like lost it because it was so concise and it was so strategic and it was so beautiful, and I was not expecting that from her. And then what hit me, oh my God, I live in a city with a huge gay community and a huge Muslim Somali community, and we never interact, but why are we here? Because we've both been attracted to a city that values us, appreciates us, gives us a seat at the table, because I do think Columbus is an open city, because most of us aren't from here. So we don't have these old harbored resentments about this is my space, right? We have these lines up 71. We have neighborhoods becoming white that used to be black and black that used to be white. But there's a culture here, but no one's hosting those conversations. You are in the epicenter of a global diaspora, and it is playing out on your block. And what you need is someone with skills like the Compassionate Communication of Central Ohio to help you be a better listener and communicator. That would be my advice.
I think that is a perfect place to end tonight's presentation. Thank you so much, Michael. Michael Wilkos, again, will be back here Thursday, March 28th at 6:30 for the future of transportation around Columbus, or around Central Ohio. So we hope you'll come back and join us for that. Thank you again, Michael.